Hi guys. This video is a little stranger than the others. Tonight, we'll be talking about some of the unusual things people did for fun in medieval times. Not the big events, not kings or wars, just ordinary people and the odd ways they pass the time. Some of it might sound funny. Some of it might sound pointless. But for them, it was normal. It was simply part of daily life. Before we begin, feel free to gently like the video. You can also leave a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I always find it genuinely fascinating to see where people are listening from and how late it is when they press play. And if you enjoy this kind of slow, calm history, you're very welcome to follow the channel. There will be more videos like this. Alright, let's begin. When we talk about fun today, we usually mean something planned, something chosen deliberately, and often something separated from work and responsibility. Fun is treated as a reward, something you earn after finishing what you have to do. In medieval times, ordinary people did not experience fun in quite the same way, and the difference is not only about technology or comfort, but about how daily life itself was structured. For most people living in medieval towns and villages, life followed a rhythm that left little room for clearly defined leisure. Work did not begin and end at fixed hours, and rest did not always mean stopping completely. Instead, people moved between tasks, obligations, and moments of waiting, and it was often inside those moments of waiting that something resembling fun appeared. You are living in a medieval town now, not as a visitor but as someone who belongs there. Morning comes early. Not because the sun is particularly bright, but because the town is already awake. You hear voices outside, animals being moved, carts rolling across uneven ground, and the general noise of people starting their day. This is not considered disruptive. It is simply how mornings sound. The idea of waking up slowly and peacefully is not common here. Instead, you become alert because the world around you demands it. In a strange way, this constant presence of others shapes how people experience enjoyment. Life is shared by default, and so is entertainment. Free time exists, but it is unpredictable. A task might be delayed, a delivery might not arrive, weather might prevent certain work from being done. When this happens, people do not necessarily think, "Now I will relax." Instead, they fill the time with conversation, observation, or simple activities that require little preparation. Fun, in this context, is not something separate from life. It is something that slips into the spaces between responsibilities. Standing in the street, for example, is not considered wasting time. Streets are places where things happen. Someone passes through carrying something unusual. A disagreement slowly becomes louder. A performer appears without warning. People gather not because they expect something impressive, but because anything different is worth noticing. You would not normally think of watching strangers as entertaining, but here it is one of the most common forms of amusement. Watching requires no effort, no tools, and no skill. It allows people to be involved without committing themselves to action. This suits a society where energy is often limited and work is physically demanding. What matters is not whether the event is remarkable, but whether it interrupts the ordinary flow of the day. Even a small disruption can feel meaningful when days tend to resemble each other closely. Another important difference is that medieval people do not expect to be constantly amused. They are not searching for stimulation. Instead, they appreciate distraction. Something mildly interesting is enough. Something familiar, repeated, and shared can hold attention longer than something new and surprising. This is why many forms of medieval fun seem slow or repetitive by modern standards. Games are played again and again with few changes. Stories are told multiple times with only small variations. Jokes are reused. The pleasure comes not from novelty, but from recognition. Fun is also closely tied to physical presence. People gather because they are already nearby. There is little sense of choosing entertainment from a distance. If something is happening where you are, that becomes the entertainment. Privacy is limited, and homes are often crowded. As a result, much of life takes place outdoors or in shared spaces. When something amusing happens, others are naturally drawn into it. Participation is not always active. Simply being there is often enough. At this point, it helps to let go of the idea that fun must be comfortable. Medieval life is already uncomfortable by modern standards, so the threshold feels different. Cold, heat, dirt, strong smells, and noise are normal parts of daily existence. Because people are accustomed to these conditions, they do not automatically associate discomfort with negativity. In some cases, mild discomfort even becomes part of the entertainment. Endurance can be amusing to watch. Awkward situations can provoke laughter rather than embarrassment. The body, with all its limitations and oddities, is treated more openly than it would be later in history. This openness changes how humor works. Physical mishaps, strange sounds, and clumsy movements are not hidden. They are noticed, commented on, and often laughed at collectively. The humor is direct and rarely subtle, but it serves a social purpose by allowing tension to be released. Fun is often social before it is individual. Activities that involve multiple people are valued because they reinforce a sense of belonging. Even competitions are less about winning and more about participating in something together. The prize, if there is one, is often secondary. You might expect that only children play games, but in medieval society the line between child and adult leisure is not very strong. Adults regularly take part in the same activities, especially when those activities require little preparation and can be done spontaneously. There is less concern about dignity in moments of leisure, partly because daily life already exposes people to public scrutiny. At the same time, fun is not idealized. It is not treated as something sacred or deeply meaningful. It is simply part of life, appearing when circumstances allow and disappearing when they change. There is no sense that enjoyment must be preserved or extended. As the day progresses, work resumes whenever it needs to. Someone remembers an obligation. Someone else is called away. The entertaining moment fades without any clear ending. There is no announcement that it is over. It simply dissolves as people return to what they were doing before. Later in the day, especially in the evening, people gather again. This might happen around food, around drink, or simply because darkness limits where one can go. Conversation becomes the main form of entertainment. Stories are shared, often repeatedly. Accuracy matters less than familiarity. You listen as much as you speak. In many cases, you listen more. Being present is enough. No one expects constant contribution. Silence is acceptable as long as it is shared. Fun, in this world, is rarely intense, rarely private, and rarely planned. It is modest, communal, and closely tied to the rhythms of daily life. It helps time pass. It softens hardship. It creates small moments of relief without demanding much in return. While we have been talking in general terms, it is worth keeping this broader understanding in mind, because it explains why some specific medieval entertainments feel strange or even absurd to us now. Once you accept that fun did not need to be refined, impressive, or comfortable, many of those activities begin to fit more naturally into their world. And since we have reached a point where this general idea feels complete, it makes sense to move gradually toward the actual examples, the small and sometimes surprising things people chose to do when they wanted to pass the time. Not all at once, and not with any urgency, just slowly, as if the day itself is unfolding. When we talk about boredom today, we usually mean a lack of stimulation, a moment where nothing interesting is happening and we feel uncomfortable because of it. In medieval times, boredom existed, but it took a very different shape, mainly because free time itself was limited, unevenly distributed, and rarely predictable. Most ordinary people did not wake up wondering how they would entertain themselves that day. Instead, they woke up thinking about what needed to be done, and only later discovered whether there would be any space left for something else. Free time was not scheduled, and it was not protected. It appeared when work was delayed, interrupted, or temporarily unnecessary. Weather played a large role in this. Rain, cold, heat, or darkness could slow down certain tasks or stop them entirely. When that happened, people did not suddenly feel liberated. They adjusted. They waited. They stayed close to others. You are still living in the medieval town, and as the morning passes, you notice that not every hour is filled with labor. There are pauses, but these pauses are not empty in the modern sense. Someone sharpens tools longer than necessary. Someone stands nearby and talks. Another person joins without being invited. Time stretches, but it does not feel wasted. This is one of the reasons boredom is rare. Silence and inactivity are almost never complete. There is always background noise, movement, or human presence. Even when nothing specific is happening, something is still going on. The concept of being alone with nothing to do is uncommon. People are surrounded by others, by shared spaces, and by constant reminders of daily life. If you stop working for a moment, you are still part of the environment. You hear conversations, you observe small interactions. These details quietly fill the mind. Free time also carries a different emotional weight. It is not always comfortable. Sometimes it feels uneasy. If you are not working, you might feel watched, or you might worry that someone will think you are avoiding responsibility. Because of this, many people stay visibly occupied, even when the task itself is not urgent. Standing around and watching becomes a socially acceptable way to fill time. You are present, you are attentive, you are not hiding. This transforms observation into a form of leisure that does not need to be named as such. In medieval life, boredom is not the absence of entertainment, but the absence of purpose. As long as there is some reason to stand where you are, boredom rarely fully forms. Purpose can be very small. Waiting for someone, keeping an eye on something, being available. This is why many medieval amusements look passive. Watching others work, argue, perform, or fail is engaging enough to occupy attention without demanding effort. It also allows people to feel included without risking embarrassment. Another reason boredom is rare is repetition. Modern boredom often comes from doing the same thing too often, without variation. In medieval times, repetition is expected. It provides structure. People find comfort in knowing what will happen next, even if it is not exciting. Days resemble each other closely. Because of this, the mind does not constantly compare the present moment to a better alternative. There is little expectation of novelty. When something slightly different occurs, it stands out naturally. At this point, it helps to remember that entertainment does not compete with other forms of stimulation. There are no screens, no constant streams of information, and no expectation that attention should always be fully occupied. Mental rest happens naturally when nothing demands focus. This creates a slower internal rhythm. People can spend long periods doing very little without feeling the urge to escape the moment. Time moves differently when there is no pressure to fill it. Children experience this rhythm early, and they grow into it. Adults do not feel the need to constantly entertain them. Children observe, imitate, and join in when possible. Their sense of boredom is shaped by the same environment. When boredom does appear, it is often shared. Several people feel it at the same time, in the same place. This shared boredom becomes an opportunity. Someone suggests something simple. Someone else reacts. Slowly, something begins. It does not need to be organized. It does not need rules. The important thing is that it gives shape to the empty moment. Free time is also uneven. Some people have more of it than others. Seasonal workers experience long periods of intense labor followed by stretches of waiting. Craftspeople might have quieter days when materials are unavailable. Servants wait for instructions that may not come immediately. In these moments, people remain alert to anything that might break the monotony. A visitor arriving, a rumor spreading, a small dispute. These events are not just interruptions. They are welcome changes in texture. You might find yourself paying close attention to details you would normally ignore. The way someone speaks, the way an animal behaves, the way a task is performed slightly differently. Attention becomes a form of entertainment. Because of this, medieval people develop a strong tolerance for stillness. Doing nothing does not feel urgent or uncomfortable. It feels temporary, and that makes it manageable. This tolerance also explains why certain slow activities are enjoyable. Sitting, talking, drinking, or simply being present for long periods does not feel empty. It feels sufficient. At the same time, free time is fragile. It can disappear without warning. Someone calls your name. A task becomes urgent. Weather changes. The moment ends. Because free time is unreliable, people do not build strong expectations around it. They take it as it comes. This attitude reduces frustration and, again, limits boredom. There is also a moral dimension to free time. Too much visible leisure can attract criticism. Being idle can be associated with laziness or irresponsibility. As a result, many amusements are framed as communal or incidental rather than purely recreational. Helping someone while enjoying the conversation feels acceptable. Watching an activity while staying alert feels acceptable. Actively seeking entertainment for its own sake feels less so. This shapes the kinds of fun that develop. Activities that can be justified as social, practical, or traditional are more common. Games tied to festivals, markets, or public gatherings feel appropriate. Private amusement feels suspicious. You would not normally describe this as boredom management, but that is essentially what it is. The structure of medieval life quietly prevents boredom from becoming overwhelming by filling space with people, routines, and shared attention. As evening approaches, the pace slows again. Darkness limits activity. Firelight gathers people into smaller spaces. Conversation deepens, but it also slows. Silence appears, but it is comfortable silence. At this time of day, boredom is least likely. Fatigue replaces it. People are content to sit, listen, and rest. The day has been long enough. And while it may seem that such a life would feel restrictive, many medieval people experience it as stable. They do not constantly imagine alternatives. They live within what is available. Understanding this helps explain why medieval entertainment does not aim to eliminate boredom completely. Instead, it softens it, shares it, and turns it into something manageable. Now that this sense of time, waiting, and limited free space is clearer, it becomes easier to understand why even very simple or strange activities could become meaningful forms of fun. Once free time appears, even briefly, almost anything can fill it. And since we have reached that point, it feels natural to move next toward the environment itself, the sounds, smells, and crowds that quietly shaped what people noticed and enjoyed without always realizing it. Sounds, smells, and crowds as entertainment. In a medieval town or village, entertainment does not always come from planned activities or deliberate performances. Very often, it comes from the environment itself, from the constant presence of sound, smell, and human movement that surrounds people throughout the day. These elements are not background noise in the modern sense. They are central to how people experience the world, and over time, they become a quiet but powerful source of stimulation. You are still moving through the same medieval town, and as the day unfolds, you begin to notice that silence is rare. Even in moments when nothing specific is happening, there is always some sound filling the air. Voices carry easily through narrow streets. Tools strike stone or wood. Animals make their presence known without hesitation. Footsteps echo. Doors open and close. Someone laughs, someone argues, someone sings a fragment of a familiar tune. None of this is considered intrusive. It is simply how life sounds. Because sound is constant, people become skilled listeners. They recognize who is nearby by voice alone. They know when something unusual is happening because the rhythm of sound changes slightly. A raised voice, a sudden pause, or a gathering crowd can signal that something worth noticing is about to occur. Sound, in this sense, becomes a form of passive entertainment. You do not need to seek it out, it finds you. Smell works in much the same way. Medieval towns are rich with strong, layered scents that modern people would likely find overwhelming. Smoke from fires drifts through streets. Food is cooked openly. Animals live close to humans. Waste is managed imperfectly. Leather, metal, wood, and damp stone all contribute their own presence. These smells are not treated as separate experiences. They blend together into a familiar atmosphere. Over time, people stop reacting strongly to them. Instead, changes in smell become noticeable and meaningful. A new food being prepared, freshly baked bread, an unfamiliar spice brought by a traveler. These moments attract attention. People pause. They comment. They gather closer, not necessarily to buy anything, but simply to observe and experience something different. You would not usually think of smell as entertainment, but here it is part of how people sense change. It provides variation in an otherwise predictable environment. Crowds amplify these effects. When people gather, sounds grow louder, smells grow stronger, and attention becomes focused. Crowds form easily in medieval life because public spaces are central to daily routines. Markets, wells, churches, and crossroads naturally draw people together. Once a crowd begins to form, it becomes entertainment in itself. Even if you do not know why people are gathering, you are drawn toward them. Curiosity does not need justification. Being part of the crowd feels safer and more interesting than standing alone. Inside the crowd, individual experiences merge. You hear fragments of conversation. You catch glimpses of expressions. Someone reacts, and that reaction spreads. Laughter moves through the group without anyone needing to explain what is funny. In many cases, the original reason for gathering becomes irrelevant. The crowd sustains itself through shared attention. This is why even minor events can become entertaining. A disagreement over price, a clumsy movement, a loud voice. These moments gain importance because they are witnessed collectively. The group gives them weight. You might find yourself standing for much longer than you intended, not because the event is remarkable, but because the experience of standing among others feels engaging. Time passes differently in a crowd. You are less aware of it. Another thing to notice is that medieval people are comfortable with closeness. Physical distance is limited. People stand near each other, brush past each other, and share space without much concern. This closeness intensifies sensory experiences. You feel the warmth of bodies nearby. You hear breathing, shifting, and quiet reactions. These details create a sense of immersion that modern entertainment often tries to recreate artificially. At the same time, crowds are unpredictable. Anything can happen. Someone might step forward. Someone might interrupt. A new sound might cut through the noise. This unpredictability keeps attention alive without demanding effort. In this environment, formal entertainment is not always necessary. A performer is welcome but not required. The crowd itself provides enough variation. It is also worth noting that medieval people are not constantly judging what they experience. There is less expectation that entertainment should be high quality or well organized. If something holds attention, even briefly, it is enough. This attitude reduces disappointment. People are content with small diversions. They do not compare what they are experiencing to an ideal version of fun. Sound plays a particularly important role here. Spoken words carry meaning, but tone, volume, and rhythm carry just as much. A familiar voice can be comforting. An unfamiliar one can be intriguing. Singing, even without skill, can draw attention simply because it breaks the usual pattern. Music exists, but it is not always polished. Simple instruments, repeated melodies, and steady rhythms are common. People recognize tunes and join in casually. Perfection is not expected. Smell and sound often combine during these moments. Food being prepared, drink being poured, and people talking over one another create a dense sensory field. This fullness occupies the mind and reduces the sense of waiting. In modern terms, this might sound overwhelming, but for medieval people, it is grounding. It confirms that life is happening around them. Another important point is that people rarely experience these sensations alone. Even when you are not directly interacting with others, their presence shapes your experience. Entertainment is shared by default. You listen to reactions. You notice where attention shifts. You follow the emotional movement of the group, rather than focusing on a single source. This collective awareness becomes a skill. People learn when to pay attention and when to drift. They learn how long to stay and when to leave without formal signals. Over time, these habits make it easy to enjoy very simple situations. Watching, listening, waiting. These are not empty actions, they are filled with subtle changes. As the day progresses, crowds grow and shrink naturally. Market hours end, people move on, new groups form elsewhere. Each shift brings slightly different sounds and smells. You might walk through several such environments in a single day, each offering a different texture of experience. None of them need to be named as entertainment, they simply are. By evening, the sensory intensity changes again. Fires dominate the smell of the air. Voices soften. Crowds become smaller and more contained. The pace slows. At this point, entertainment becomes quieter. Listening replaces watching. Being present becomes more important than reacting. Understanding this sensory world helps explain why medieval entertainment often seems passive or unstructured. When your environment already provides constant variation, you do not need much else. And once you accept that sound, smell, and crowds themselves are engaging, it becomes easier to understand why people were drawn to activities that might seem trivial today. In a world where attention is shaped by shared presence rather than personal choice, even the simplest gathering can feel meaningful. With this in mind, it feels natural to move next toward one specific source of medieval fascination, something that fits perfectly into this noisy, crowded world, and that involves watching rather than doing more often than not. In medieval life, animals are not something separate from everyday experience. They are everywhere, moving through streets, standing in yards, tied near doorways, resting in corners, or being led from one place to another. Because of this constant presence, animals become a natural source of attention, and over time, simply watching them becomes a quiet and accepted form of entertainment. You are still moving through the town, and you quickly notice that animals are not treated as background objects. People look at them, comment on them, and react to their behavior. An animal doing something unexpected, or even something slightly out of the ordinary, can draw a small crowd without much effort. This is not because people think animals are amusing in a childish way. It is because animals bring movement into a world that is often slow, repetitive, and physically demanding. Their behavior breaks patterns in subtle ways. A pig wandering into the wrong place, a dog following someone it does not belong to, a horse refusing to move when it is expected to. These moments attract attention because they are unpredictable, but not threatening. They create just enough uncertainty to hold interest. Watching animals does not require participation. You do not need to speak, move, or decide anything. You simply observe. This makes it an ideal way to pass time, especially when energy is limited, or when you are waiting for something else to happen. Animals also behave without concern for social rules. They stop, start, make noise, and interact with their surroundings freely. In a society where human behavior is closely watched and often judged, this freedom is noticeable. It can even be comforting. You might find yourself standing longer than you intended, watching an animal repeat the same action over and over. There is no expectation that something dramatic will occur. The repetition itself becomes absorbing. In medieval towns, animals are part of the working world, but they are also part of the social world. People know individual animals, especially those that belong to neighbors or frequent certain areas. An animal's habits become familiar, and any deviation from those habits is noticed immediately. This familiarity adds another layer to the entertainment. Watching is not just about what the animal is doing, but about how it compares to what it usually does. Small changes become meaningful. Children and adults watch together. There is no sense that this is a childish pastime. Everyone shares the same environment, and everyone notices the same things. Comments are made casually. Laughter happens naturally. At times, animals become the center of attention simply because they are present in large numbers. Livestock being moved through the streets slows everything down. People stop working. Conversations pause. The movement of animals reshapes the rhythm of the space. In these moments, watching becomes collective. People gather not because they were invited, but because the environment itself has changed. The animals bring variety into the day. It is also important to remember that medieval people are deeply familiar with animals. They understand their needs, their limits, and their typical behavior. This knowledge makes watching more engaging. People notice details that a modern observer might miss. A limp, a strange sound, a moment of hesitation. These details invite interpretation. Someone comments. Someone else responds. The animal becomes a topic of conversation. You would not normally think of this as entertainment, but it fills time in a way that feels natural and shared. It requires no tools, no preparation, and no special permission. Animals also interact with each other in ways that attract attention. A brief confrontation, a moment of curiosity, a chase that lasts only a few seconds. These interactions create small narratives that people follow instinctively. Nothing needs to be resolved. The interest lies in watching how it unfolds, not in reaching an outcome. At times, animals become part of informal competitions or challenges, but even without that, their behavior holds attention. People are used to observing animals closely because so much of daily life depends on them. This observation easily turns into leisure when there is nothing urgent to do. Smell and sound play a role here as well. Animals bring strong sensory elements into shared spaces. Their presence changes the atmosphere, reminding people of the physical reality of life around them. Rather than pushing this away, medieval people accept it. It becomes part of the experience. Watching an animal includes hearing it and smelling it, and this full sensory engagement keeps the mind occupied. There is also a sense of safety in watching animals. Unlike watching people, animals do not carry the same social risks. You are not expected to respond correctly or interpret hidden meanings. What you see is what you get. This makes animal watching especially appealing during moments of waiting. You can focus your attention without feeling exposed. Over time, this habit becomes deeply ingrained. People naturally look toward animals when they need something to occupy their mind. The presence of animals fills space that might otherwise feel empty. In some cases, animals become symbols of good or bad fortune, and watching them takes on additional meaning. A calm animal can be reassuring. A restless one can make people uneasy. These interpretations add depth to the experience, even when nothing actually happens. As the day continues, animals move in and out of view. Each appearance slightly reshapes the environment. Attention shifts gently, without effort. By the afternoon, you might realize that you have spent a surprising amount of time simply observing animals and the way people react to them. It does not feel wasted. It feels like part of being present. As evening approaches, animals settle, movement slows, sounds soften. Watching becomes quieter, but it does not disappear entirely. Even resting animals hold attention through small movements and familiar habits. This relationship between people and animals helps explain why certain animal-related activities later become formalized as entertainment. Once watching animals is already part of daily life, it is only a small step toward organizing that attention around specific events. And while we are still focused on simple observation for now, it makes sense that, sooner or later, people would begin to take this shared attention and guide it slightly, turning everyday animal behavior into something more structured without ever fully losing its casual nature. That gentle shift is where things begin to change. Once you understand how common it was to watch animals simply move through daily life, it becomes much easier to understand why people eventually began paying closer attention to those movements and, in some cases, shaping them into something more deliberate. Pig races are one of the clearest examples of this shift, not because they were especially dramatic, but because they grew naturally out of habits that already existed. Pigs were everywhere in medieval towns and villages. They wandered freely through streets, searched for food near homes and markets, and interacted with people constantly. Unlike horses, which were associated with status and work, pigs were familiar in a very ordinary way. People knew their behavior well. They knew how pigs moved, how stubborn they could be, and how unpredictable their reactions sometimes were. This familiarity is important because pig races did not appear as a strange or shocking idea to medieval people. They felt like a logical extension of something everyone already understood. You are standing near a market area, and pigs are being herded from one place to another. The animals resist slightly, move unevenly, and make noise as they go. People stop to watch, partly because the movement blocks the street, and partly because pigs never move in a straight or elegant way. Their awkwardness draws attention. Someone makes a comment, someone else laughs. Another person points out which pig seems faster or more determined. Without planning it, people begin to compare. At some point, someone suggests letting two pigs move freely toward a known destination. There is no formal announcement, no rules are written down. The suggestion spreads through the group naturally. People step aside, attention focuses. What follows is not a clean race in the modern sense. The pigs do not move when expected. They stop, turn, or wander off. This unpredictability is part of the appeal. Watching requires patience, and patience is something medieval people are used to exercising. The crowd reacts slowly. There is no shouting at first. People observe. They comment quietly. As the pigs move, interest builds gradually rather than suddenly. Pig races are not taken seriously because people expect efficiency or fairness. They are taken seriously because they are shared. Everyone agrees, for a short time, to focus attention on the same simple outcome. Which pig will arrive first? This shared focus gives the event weight. It becomes something to talk about, something to remember, even if the race itself lasts only a few minutes. You might expect laughter to dominate these moments, and sometimes it does, but there is also concentration. People watch closely. They notice small details. A pig choosing a slightly better path, another being distracted. These observations are discussed as if they matter. In a way, they do matter. They give structure to waiting. They turn idle time into a narrative, however small. Pig races also reflect how medieval entertainment often sits between seriousness and play. People know that the outcome does not change their lives, but they still care while it is happening. Attention is given freely, without irony. There is also often something at stake, even if it is modest. A small wager, a piece of food, a drink later in the day. These stakes are not meant to create tension, but to justify interest. They give people permission to care. Food plays a particularly important role here. In a society where food is never taken for granted, winning something edible carries meaning. Even when the prize is symbolic, the idea of it adds substance to the event. Pig races are rarely private. They happen in open spaces where anyone can watch. Children, adults, and the elderly all gather. No one is excluded. This inclusiveness reinforces the idea that this is acceptable fun. You would not normally imagine a farm animal becoming the center of public attention in this way, but in medieval life the boundary between work animals and entertainment is thin. Animals already occupy shared spaces. Turning attention toward them feels natural. Another reason pig races are taken seriously is that they provide a break from hierarchy. Social status matters less when everyone is watching the same animals. For a moment, attention is evenly distributed. Reactions matter more than rank. People comment freely, they laugh openly, they disagree without consequence. This temporary flattening of social structure makes these events appealing. There is also an element of familiarity that reduces risk. Pigs are not dangerous in the way other animals might be. Watching them does not create fear. It creates mild suspense at most. This makes pig races suitable for casual participation. You can watch without committing emotionally. You can leave at any moment without missing something important. At times, pig races become more regular, especially during festivals or market days. Repetition turns them into expected features of certain gatherings. People look forward to them without building high expectations. The races remain simple. Attempts to over-organize them often fail. Pigs resist structure. Their behavior keeps the event grounded in unpredictability. This unpredictability is precisely what keeps interest alive. No two races unfold the same way, even if the setting is familiar. Small variations create just enough difference to hold attention. From a modern perspective, it might seem strange that such an activity could hold collective focus. But when you consider how medieval people experience time, it makes sense. Time is not something to be filled with intense stimulation. It is something to move through together. Pig races help time move. As the race ends, there is no ceremony. The pigs are guided away. People talk briefly about what happened. Opinions are shared. Disagreements fade quickly. The crowd disperses as naturally as it formed. People return to what they were doing, carrying the memory lightly. It becomes a reference point later, something mentioned in passing. By evening, the event may already feel distant, but its effect remains. It gave shape to part of the day. It provided a shared experience without demanding much. Understanding pig races this way helps clarify why medieval entertainment does not aim for spectacle. It aims for participation, even if that participation is passive. And once you accept that something as simple as watching pigs move could be taken seriously for a short time, it becomes easier to understand why other, equally modest competitions could develop around everyday objects, especially food, which carries its own weight in medieval life. That shift, from animals to prizes, from movement to physical effort, leads naturally into another familiar scene, one where people gather not to watch pigs wander, but to see who will be willing to struggle for something as simple and valuable as a piece of cheese. Once you move from animal-based amusement to human competition, the shift feels natural rather than sudden, especially when you remember how central food is to medieval life. Food is not a casual reward. It is not symbolic. It is practical, valuable, and emotionally charged. Because of this, competing for food makes sense in a way that competing for abstract prizes does not. In medieval society, food represents effort, time, and survival. Every loaf of bread, every piece of cheese, every portion of meat carries the memory of labor behind it. Growing, transporting, preparing, and preserving food all require work, often shared among many people. When food becomes the prize, everyone immediately understands its importance. You are standing in a public space again, perhaps during a market day or a festival, and people have gathered with no clear plan other than to pass time together. Someone produces food, not to eat immediately, but to place at the center of attention. The food itself becomes the reason people stop and watch. There is no need to explain why this matters. Everyone knows. Competing for food feels more honest than competing for something decorative. There is no pretense that the prize is meaningless. Winning means gaining something useful. Losing means returning to daily life unchanged. This clarity makes these competitions easy to accept. No one questions whether they are worth doing. The competitions themselves are often simple. They require strength, balance, endurance, or persistence, rather than refined skill. The rules, if they exist, are minimal. The goal is clear, and the effort is visible. Watching someone struggle for food carries a different emotional weight than watching someone compete for status alone. There is empathy mixed with amusement. People understand what is at stake, even if the stakes are not life-changing. You might expect this to create tension, but most of the time it does not. The food offered is usually modest. Enough to matter, but not enough to cause serious conflict. The balance is important. Food-based competitions also fit naturally into communal settings. They often take place during gatherings where food is already present, such as festivals, religious celebrations, or market days. The competition feels like an extension of the event rather than an interruption. In these moments, food serves multiple roles. It is a reward, a spectacle, and a symbol of shared values. Everyone recognizes its importance, but no one treats it as sacred in the modern sense. It is something to be earned, even playfully. There is also an element of fairness that people expect. The food must be visible. The challenge must appear achievable. If the competition seems too rigged or unfair, interest fades quickly. The audience wants to believe that effort matters. This belief sustains attention. People watch closely. They comment on technique, even if the technique is crude. They offer advice. They laugh when someone fails and cheer when someone persists. Failure is part of the entertainment, but it is rarely cruel. Losing does not bring shame. It simply means the moment passes on to someone else. Competing for food also allows people to display physical qualities without openly boasting. Strength, endurance, and stubbornness are demonstrated indirectly. The competition provides cover for self-expression. You might notice that people who would normally avoid attention step forward during these moments. The presence of food makes participation feel justified. They are not seeking attention, they are seeking sustenance. This distinction matters in a society where public behavior is closely observed. Another reason food competitions work so well is that they create clear endings. Someone wins. The food is claimed. The moment concludes. This closure is satisfying in a world where many things remain unresolved. After the competition, the winner is often treated casually. There is no lasting elevation of status. The food is consumed, shared, or saved. The group moves on. This prevents resentment. The competition does not linger. You would not normally think of this as entertainment designed for an audience, but it functions that way. The effort, the waiting, and the outcome provide structure. Time is shaped into a small story. The audience plays an important role. Their reactions guide the pace. Their comments influence how participants behave. Without the crowd, the competition would feel empty. In medieval life, food is rarely consumed alone. Even when someone wins a prize, it often becomes part of a shared experience. Others comment on how it will be eaten, when it will be eaten, or with whom. This shared interest softens the edge of competition. Winning does not isolate the winner. It draws them back into the group. There is also humor in these events, often understated. The contrast between effort and reward creates irony. Someone struggles greatly for something small. The audience recognizes this and reacts with amusement rather than judgment. This humor is not mocking. It is grounded in familiarity. Everyone understands effort. Everyone understands hunger. The situation feels relatable. As these competitions repeat over time, they become expected features of certain gatherings. People anticipate them without demanding novelty. The same structure works again and again. Variation comes from participants, weather, mood, and circumstance, rather than from changing the rules. This suits a culture comfortable with repetition. Food competitions also highlight how medieval fun often balances seriousness and play. The effort is real, the reward matters, but the context remains light. This balance prevents these events from becoming violent or overly aggressive in most cases. The goal is not domination, it is participation. You might notice that people who lose often stay to watch others. Leaving immediately would feel abrupt. Staying reinforces the communal nature of the event. Over time, these habits strengthen social bonds. People remember who participated, who won, and who made the effort. These memories become part of shared history, referenced later in casual conversation. As the day moves on, the competition fades into memory, but its effect remains. It provided focus. It filled time. It created a moment of shared attention. Understanding why people competed for food rather than abstract prizes helps clarify many other medieval entertainments. Practical value, visibility, and shared meaning matter more than spectacle. Once food becomes an acceptable reward, it is only a small step toward competitions that involve not just effort, but direct physical struggle, especially when the prize is something solid, familiar, and immediately useful. That step leads naturally into another scene, one where competition becomes more physical, more personal, and slightly more intense, centered around something as simple, tangible, and surprisingly important as a piece of cheese. Once competition for food becomes familiar and accepted, it is not surprising that some of these contests begin to involve closer physical contact. Wrestling for cheese and other small rewards grows naturally out of the same logic that shaped earlier amusements, where effort, visibility, and shared attention mattered more than refinement or safety in the modern sense. Cheese, in particular, holds a special place in medieval life. It is durable, valuable, and widely understood. It represents stored effort and careful preparation. Unlike fresh food, it lasts. Because of this, a piece of cheese feels like a meaningful reward without being extravagant. You are in a public space again, perhaps during a seasonal gathering or a market day, and people are already lingering without a clear purpose. Someone produces a wheel or a wedge of cheese and places it where everyone can see it. There is no announcement, but attention shifts immediately. Everyone understands that the cheese matters. The suggestion of wrestling does not come with detailed rules. It does not need to. The idea is simple enough that it explains itself. Two people struggle, one gains control, and the prize is claimed. The clarity of this outcome makes it easy to accept. Wrestling in this context is not formal sport. It is rough, uneven, and often brief. Participants are not trained athletes. They are ordinary people using their bodies in familiar ways. Strength, balance, and stubbornness matter more than technique. You would not normally expect people to willingly risk embarrassment or discomfort in public, but the presence of a tangible reward changes that calculation. Wrestling for cheese provides justification. The effort feels reasonable because the prize is practical. The crowd responds quickly, people gather closer, comments begin. Advice is shouted, laughter appears, but it is mixed with concentration. The outcome is uncertain, and that uncertainty holds attention. Unlike some earlier amusements, this one carries a clearer sense of tension. Bodies are involved. Balance can be lost. Someone might fall. But the risk is limited and understood. Serious injury is not the goal, and excessive force is usually discouraged by the crowd itself. Social pressure plays an important role here. Participants are expected to struggle, but not to go too far. The audience watches closely, ready to intervene verbally if things become uncomfortable. This shared oversight keeps the contest within acceptable bounds. Wrestling for small rewards also appeals because it feels honest. There is no illusion of fairness beyond visible effort. Whoever controls the cheese at the end wins. There are no judges, no hidden rules, and no delayed outcomes. This transparency makes it satisfying to watch. Everyone can see what is happening and why. You might notice that people who are normally reserved become more animated during these contests. Physical struggle invites commentary. The crowd reacts to every shift, every slip, every sudden movement. Attention stays focused without effort. At the same time, these events rarely feel hostile. Participants often know each other. Even when they do not, the shared context reduces personal animosity. The struggle is framed as temporary and situational. Once the contest ends, the tension dissolves quickly. The winner is acknowledged, sometimes teased, sometimes congratulated. The loser is not shamed. They step back into the crowd with little consequence. The cheese itself often becomes a shared topic rather than a private possession. People comment on how it will be eaten, when it will be eaten, or whether it will be shared. The prize continues to generate conversation after the contest ends. This extension of interest is important. It means the entertainment does not stop when the struggle ends. It lingers lightly, shaping the rest of the gathering. Other small rewards work in similar ways. Bread, small tools, clothing items, or simple household objects can all become prizes. The key is that the reward must be immediately understandable and useful. Abstract rewards do not work as well. People want to see what is being fought for. Visibility matters. Wrestling competitions also reflect how medieval people understand physicality. The body is a tool used daily for labor. Strain and exertion are familiar sensations. Using the body for entertainment does not feel unnatural. Because of this familiarity, people are comfortable watching physical effort. They do not avert their eyes, they comment openly. Physical struggle is not hidden away. Children watch these events alongside adults. They learn by observing. They see how effort is measured, how limits are enforced, and how the group responds to success and failure. This shared observation reinforces social norms. Wrestling is allowed here, in this context, for this reason. Outside of it, behavior might be judged differently. You would not normally think of this as structured learning, but it serves that function quietly. Entertainment and social education overlap. Another reason these contests are taken seriously is that they create memorable moments. Physical struggle is easier to recall than passive observation. People remember who wrestled, who slipped, who nearly won. These memories are retold later, sometimes exaggerated slightly, sometimes simplified. Accuracy matters less than recognition. The event becomes part of local story. Over time, certain individuals become known for participating, not necessarily for winning, but for being willing. This willingness earns a kind of informal respect. However, this respect is limited. It does not translate into long-term authority. It exists only within the memory of the event. This limitation keeps the competitions light. No one's identity is permanently changed by winning or losing. The stakes remain manageable. As the day continues, other activities replace the wrestling. The crowd thins. Attention shifts. The cheese disappears, either eaten or set aside. The contest fades into the background of the day, but its effect remains. It provided a moment of intensity within an otherwise steady rhythm. Understanding wrestling for cheese helps clarify how medieval entertainment often balances effort and reward, seriousness and play, risk and control. The activity looks rough, but it is shaped by shared expectations. And once you accept that physical struggle could be framed this way, it becomes easier to understand why other forms of bodily humor and competition would also be accepted, even celebrated, especially when they involved embarrassment rather than strength. That shift, from physical struggle to bodily expression, leads naturally into another form of medieval amusement, one that feels strange today but made sense in a world far less concerned with privacy or restraint. After watching people wrestle for cheese or struggle visibly for small rewards, it becomes easier to understand why physical discomfort itself could slowly turn into a form of amusement. In medieval life, discomfort is not an exception. It is the background condition. Because of this, the line between what is endured and what is enjoyed is thinner than it might seem today. Daily life already involves cold, heat, hunger, strain, and exhaustion. Bodies are constantly used, pushed, and tested through work. When discomfort is unavoidable, it loses some of its power to intimidate. It becomes familiar. Familiar things are easier to laugh at. You are living in a time where comfort is not expected, so experiencing additional discomfort for a short time does not feel outrageous. It feels manageable, even trivial, especially when it is voluntary and temporary. This is where amusement begins to take shape. Physical discomfort as entertainment rarely starts as a planned activity. It grows out of existing habits. Someone dares someone else to endure something slightly unpleasant. Others watch. Reactions follow. Laughter appears. The moment gains attention. The key difference here is consent. The discomfort is chosen. Even if it is encouraged by the crowd, participation feels voluntary. This sense of choice transforms discomfort into spectacle. You might see people standing barefoot on cold ground longer than necessary, holding awkward positions, or enduring minor physical challenges simply to see how long they can last. The effort is visible, the discomfort is obvious, the outcome is uncertain. The audience responds to signs of strain. Facial expressions matter. Small movements matter. A shift in posture can trigger laughter or encouragement. Attention stays focused because the body tells a clear story. Unlike structured competitions, these moments do not always have winners. Sometimes the amusement lies in watching someone give up. Sometimes it lies in watching someone persist longer than expected. Persistence becomes impressive, not because it leads to reward, but because it defies expectation. You might expect cruelty in these situations, but it is often limited. The discomfort is usually mild enough to remain within social boundaries. Severe pain is not entertaining. It ends attention rather than sustaining it. The crowd plays a regulating role again. If something goes too far, reactions change. Laughter fades. Concern appears. The activity ends. Social cues enforce limits. This self-regulation allows discomfort-based amusement to exist without turning into violence. It relies on shared understanding rather than formal rules. Another important factor is relatability. Everyone knows what discomfort feels like. Watching someone endure it creates a connection. The audience imagines themselves in the same situation, measuring their own tolerance silently. This comparison adds depth to the entertainment. It is not just about watching someone else. It is about reflecting on personal limits. You might notice that these amusements often occur during idle moments. When nothing else demands attention, discomfort fills the gap. It provides structure to empty time. Unlike loud or dramatic entertainment, these moments can be quiet. People watch closely, speaking softly, reacting with small sounds rather than shouts. The tension is subtle. This makes the amusement compatible with communal spaces where not everyone wants noise. It can coexist with conversation, eating, or resting. Physical discomfort also becomes amusing when paired with absurdity. Holding an awkward position, balancing something unstable, or remaining still under irritation creates visual contrast. The seriousness of the effort clashes with the triviality of the situation. This contrast invites laughter. In medieval culture, humor often emerges from imbalance. The body working hard for no obvious reason fits this pattern perfectly. You would not normally celebrate discomfort, but in a world where it cannot be avoided, reframing it as temporary amusement gives people a sense of control. Choosing discomfort feels empowering. This sense of control matters more than the amusement itself. It turns passive suffering into active participation. Children learn this early by imitation. They copy what they see adults do, testing their own tolerance. Through play, they learn where limits are. Adults observe and comment. They remember their own experiences. The cycle continues without formal instruction. Over time, certain discomfort-based activities become expected. People recognize them. They anticipate them. What began as spontaneous becomes familiar. Yet novelty is not required. The same discomfort can be entertaining repeatedly. Because the participants change, the context shifts, and the reactions differ. This reliance on variation rather than innovation suits a culture that values continuity. Physical discomfort also becomes a form of storytelling. People recall who endured what, how long they lasted, and how they reacted. These details are shared later, sometimes exaggerated slightly. The stories emphasize resilience, humor, and willingness rather than success. Endurance becomes admirable even when it leads nowhere. Importantly, these amusements do not require resources, no tools, no prizes, no preparation. The body itself is enough. This accessibility makes them widespread. Anyone can participate. Anyone can watch. In a society where resources are limited, entertainment that requires nothing is especially valuable. You might expect authority figures to discourage such behavior, but they often tolerate it. As long as order is maintained and no harm occurs, these moments pose little threat. In some cases, authority figures even participate, briefly stepping into the same vulnerability as everyone else. This shared experience softens social boundaries. The temporary suspension of hierarchy adds to the amusement. Watching someone of higher status endure discomfort humanizes them. However, this suspension is brief. Once the moment passes, social order returns unchanged. This balance allows discomfort-based amusement to exist without undermining structure. As you move through medieval life, these moments accumulate quietly. They do not dominate memory, but they fill gaps between larger events. They give texture to time. Understanding physical discomfort as amusement helps explain why other forms of entertainment push boundaries of embarrassment and bodily expression even further. If discomfort is acceptable, then exposure, sound, and lack of restraint become easier to tolerate. That shift leads into another area of medieval humor, one that relies less on endurance and more on shared reactions to the human body itself, especially when it behaves in ways that modern audiences might find surprising. And once that door opens, amusement takes on a form that feels strange today but felt completely natural then. Once physical discomfort is accepted as something people can laugh at together, it becomes much easier to understand why bodily sounds themselves enter the realm of public humor. In medieval life, the body is not hidden. It is present, audible, visible, and unavoidable. Because of this, sounds that modern audiences might find embarrassing or private are treated very differently. You are in a crowded place again, and crowds matter here more than the specific location. It could be a market, a festival, a churchyard after service, or simply a narrow street where people gather naturally. Bodies are close. Personal space, as we understand it, barely exists. Sounds travel easily in these conditions. Coughing, sneezing, burping, and other bodily noises blend into the background of daily life. They are expected. No one reacts strongly to them because they are constant. Silence is rare. Noise is normal. In this environment, certain sounds stand out not because they are shocking, but because they are recognizable. People know exactly what caused them. That shared recognition is where humor begins. Public humor built around bodily sounds does not rely on surprise alone. It relies on timing, context, and audience reaction. A sound that occurs at the wrong moment, during a pause or a serious discussion, creates contrast. That contrast triggers laughter. The laughter is not always loud. Sometimes it is suppressed. Sometimes it spreads slowly. But it spreads because everyone understands the situation instantly. You might expect people to feel shame, but shame functions differently here. The body is not considered something that must be controlled perfectly at all times. It is a working body, a noisy body, a body that reacts. Because bodily control is not absolute, minor failures of control are not moral failures, they are just moments. This distinction is crucial. Without it, bodily humor would feel cruel. Instead, it feels communal. People often laugh with the person who produced the sound rather than at them. The laughter acknowledges shared humanity rather than isolating the individual. In some cases, people intentionally produce bodily sounds for amusement. This is where humor becomes more deliberate. The act itself becomes performance. You might see someone exaggerate a noise or repeat it intentionally, drawing attention. The audience responds immediately. The line between accident and intention blurs. What matters is not whether the sound was planned, but how it is received. Public bodily humor often escalates. One sound invites another. Someone responds. The situation builds rhythm. This escalation holds attention. These moments can last longer than expected because they require no preparation and no resolution. They continue until interest fades naturally. The lack of structure makes them flexible. They fit into any pause. They fill time without demanding it. Children are especially attentive to this kind of humor. They react quickly and openly. Adults notice this and sometimes encourage it, sometimes tolerate it, sometimes pretend not to notice while still listening closely. This layered response adds depth to the scene. Not everyone reacts the same way, but everyone is aware. Public bodily humor also serves as a social equalizer. Status matters less when the body asserts itself. A noble coughing loudly or making an embarrassing sound becomes briefly indistinguishable from everyone else. These moments are remembered not as scandals but as amusing interruptions. They humanize authority figures. You would not normally think of bodily sounds as entertainment, but in a world with limited options, they become part of the shared experience. They are immediate, accessible, and understandable. No explanation is needed, no translation is required. Everyone knows what they mean. This universality makes bodily humor especially effective. It crosses age, class, and occupation. There is also an element of relief involved. Laughter releases tension. Bodily sounds often appear during moments of waiting, discomfort, or boredom. Humor provides a release. This function is subtle but important. It helps regulate group emotion. Over time, certain bodily sounds become associated with humor more than others. Some are considered harmless. Others are more provocative. These distinctions vary by place and context. The boundaries are learned through experience rather than instruction. People observe reactions and adjust behavior accordingly. You might notice that humor based on bodily sounds rarely exists alone. It is often paired with gestures, facial expressions, or commentary. The sound initiates the moment, but reaction sustains it. This interaction between sound and response creates a feedback loop. The audience shapes the performance. In medieval life, where formal entertainment is infrequent, this kind of spontaneous humor carries significant weight. It fills gaps and creates memories. These moments are talked about later, sometimes briefly, sometimes repeatedly. They become part of shared narrative. Importantly, bodily humor does not require mockery to function. While teasing occurs, it is usually mild. Excessive ridicule disrupts the balance and ends the amusement. The goal is not humiliation, it is recognition. As you move through medieval communities, you would quickly learn which sounds provoke laughter and which provoke silence. This knowledge becomes social literacy. People who understand these cues navigate social spaces more smoothly. Public bodily humor also reflects a different relationship with the body itself. The body is not an enemy to be subdued. It is a companion that occasionally misbehaves. Laughing at that misbehavior acknowledges its inevitability. You might expect religious or moral pressure to suppress this kind of humor, but reactions are mixed. While certain contexts discourage it, many others allow it freely. The separation between sacred and everyday life is not absolute. Humor leaks through. This leakage does not undermine belief, it coexists with it. As the day continues, bodily humor appears and disappears unpredictably. It does not dominate attention, but it punctuates time. These punctuations matter. They break monotony. They create moments of shared focus. Understanding public humor, built around bodily sounds, helps explain why more exaggerated forms of bodily comedy would eventually emerge, forms that move beyond accidental noise into deliberate performance. Once people accept that the body can be a source of shared laughter, it is only a small step toward turning that laughter into competition, where producing certain sounds becomes not just amusing, but impressive. And that step leads into one of the strangest yet most revealing entertainments of the medieval world, where bodily sound is no longer incidental, but central to the event itself. Once public humor built around bodily sounds becomes familiar and socially acceptable, it is almost inevitable that some of these sounds move from accidental moments into deliberate performance. In medieval life, where the body is already present and audible, turning a bodily function into structured amusement does not feel as shocking as it does to a modern audience. Instead, it feels like a logical extension of existing humor. Farting contests, strange as they sound now, exist within a cultural context where embarrassment carries far less weight and shared laughter carries far more. The sound itself is not mysterious. Everyone knows what it is. Everyone knows where it comes from. That shared understanding removes shock and replaces it with anticipation. You are again among a group of people who are already gathered with little urgency. Time stretches. Attention wanders. Someone produces a sound intentionally, and instead of discomfort, there is recognition. People smile before they laugh. The laughter comes not because the sound is new, but because it is expected in an unexpected moment. What transforms this from random humor into a contest is repetition and comparison. One sound invites another. Someone tries to respond. Someone else tries to do better. Suddenly the group is watching not just for amusement, but for variation. This is how structure forms without planning. Farting contests are rarely formal. There are no written rules. There are no official judges. The crowd decides collectively what counts as impressive. Volume, duration, timing, and tone all matter, but none are defined precisely. This vagueness allows flexibility. The contest adapts to the mood of the crowd. You might expect disgust to override humor, but disgust operates differently here. Bodily functions are already integrated into daily life. Smells, sounds, and messes are common. The body is not sanitized. Because of this, farting does not carry the same taboo. It is noticeable, but not forbidden. Making it public simply shifts it into performance. Performance changes everything. Once the act is framed as intentional and entertaining, the audience responds differently. They evaluate rather than recoil. They compare rather than judge. Participants are not necessarily trying to humiliate themselves. They are trying to engage the group. Success is measured by reaction. Laughter becomes applause. You might notice that people rarely perform alone. Someone almost always responds. This call and response pattern keeps attention alive. It turns the event into a shared experience rather than a solitary act. The crowd often encourages escalation, louder, longer, better timed. The encouragement is playful rather than demanding. At the same time, limits still exist. If the situation becomes uncomfortable, reactions shift. Silence replaces laughter. The performance ends. Again, the crowd regulates behavior without formal authority. These contests often occur among people who know each other, but they can also happen among strangers brought together by circumstance. Shared humor bridges gaps quickly. Status temporarily dissolves. Skill here is bodily, not social. Anyone can participate. This temporary equality is part of the appeal. The body becomes the great equalizer. Children often watch these contests with fascination. Adults may pretend to disapprove while still listening closely. This layered reaction adds complexity to the moment. Disapproval itself can become part of the humor. Importantly, farting contests are not constant. They appear occasionally, usually when boredom peaks. They fill a specific need rather than dominating culture. Their rarity makes them more memorable. These events also rely heavily on timing. A sound delivered at the right moment can produce far more laughter than one delivered without context. Timing demonstrates awareness of the group. This awareness is a social skill. Because of this, the best performers are not necessarily those who produce the loudest sounds, but those who read the room well. They sense when attention is available. This subtlety contradicts modern assumptions about crude humor being mindless. In reality, it requires sensitivity to group dynamics. You might expect religious or moral authorities to suppress such behavior, and sometimes they do, but enforcement is inconsistent. In informal settings, tolerance is common. People understand that these moments do not challenge belief or order. They provide release. Release matters in a world filled with routine labor and limited distraction. Farting contests also reflect a broader medieval attitude toward humor, one that embraces the body rather than hiding it. The body is not an obstacle to dignity. It is part of being human. Laughing at bodily functions does not diminish seriousness elsewhere. It coexists with it. This coexistence allows humor to appear even in otherwise sober environments. Life is not segmented cleanly into serious and humorous spaces. The contests themselves rarely have clear winners. Even when someone is declared victorious by the crowd, the declaration is informal. It fades quickly. There is no lasting reputation built on farting skill alone. This impermanence keeps the activity light. It prevents it from becoming competitive in a harmful way. After the laughter fades, conversation resumes. The group moves on. The moment becomes memory. Later, it might be referenced casually, not with embarrassment, but with amusement. These references reinforce group bonds. Shared laughter creates shared history. Understanding farting contests as accepted comedy helps clarify how medieval entertainment values participation over refinement. The goal is not polish, it is connection. The body provides a common language that everyone understands. You might think this kind of humor signals a lack of sophistication, but within its context, it serves a clear purpose. It regulates boredom. It breaks tension. It reinforces belonging. In a world without constant stimulation, even simple acts carry weight. These contests also highlight how medieval people experience their bodies differently. Bodily control is desirable, but not absolute. Losing control briefly is not catastrophic. This flexibility allows humor to flourish. As the day continues, farting contests disappear as quickly as they appear. They leave no trace beyond memory, and perhaps a few lingering smiles. They are not planned, they are not preserved, they exist only in the moment. And yet, their existence tells us something important about medieval life. It tells us that fun does not always require complexity. Sometimes it requires only attention and willingness. Once you accept that bodily sound itself can become competitive entertainment, it becomes easier to understand how age boundaries blur in medieval amusement, where children and adults share the same spaces, the same jokes, and often the same games. That shared participation across generations shapes the next layer of medieval fun, where distinction between adult and child entertainment becomes surprisingly unclear. Once you step back from specific activities and start looking at who is actually participating in medieval amusements, one of the most striking details becomes impossible to ignore, because children and adults are not separated into different worlds of play the way they are today. Entertainment is shared, observed together and experienced side by side, not because people believe this is ideal, but because it is practical, familiar, and rarely questioned. In medieval life, age does not define separate social spaces nearly as strictly as it does now. Children are present almost everywhere adults are. They work nearby, listen nearby, and watch constantly. Because of this, when entertainment happens, children are already there. There is no special effort made to remove them or shield them from what is happening. Games, jokes, contests, and physical amusements unfold in open spaces where everyone can see and hear. A child standing at the edge of a crowd watches the same pig race, the same wrestling match, and the same bodily humor as an adult standing beside them. This shared exposure shapes how play is understood. Rather than being something reserved for childhood, play becomes a general human activity that appears whenever time and attention allow. Adults do not stop playing because they grow older. They simply play differently, sometimes more carefully, sometimes more openly, but always within the same environment. Children learn this early. They do not need instruction, they observe. When a game begins, children instinctively move closer. They watch reactions. They notice which behaviors are encouraged and which are quietly discouraged. Over time, they imitate what they see, adjusting their actions based on the crowd's response. Adults rarely stop this imitation unless it becomes disruptive. In many cases, they allow it, seeing it as part of growing up rather than misbehavior. This tolerance creates continuity. Games do not belong to an age group, they belong to the community. You might expect adults to dominate these spaces, but often they do not. Children participate actively, especially in simpler games that rely on endurance, balance, or repetition rather than strength alone. Adults watch children play with the same interest they watch other adults, sometimes offering encouragement, sometimes offering commentary, sometimes simply observing quietly. This observation is not sentimental, it is practical. Watching children play reveals who is learning quickly, who persists, and who withdraws. These traits matter later. Games become informal assessments without being labeled as such. At the same time, children watch adults closely. They learn when humor is appropriate, how physical effort is displayed, and how limits are negotiated. They see adults lose, laugh, and step away without shame. This modeling is important. It teaches that failure in play does not carry lasting consequences. Because games are shared, rules are flexible. Adults adjust intensity instinctively. They pull back slightly when children are involved. Children push themselves to match what they see. This mutual adjustment keeps games inclusive without formal regulation. You might notice that children often join games partway through rather than at the beginning. They watch first. They enter when they feel confident. This gradual participation mirrors how they enter work later in life. Play becomes rehearsal. There is also very little effort to sanitize content. Jokes are not simplified for children. Bodily humor is not hidden. Physical discomfort is not disguised. Children absorb all of it as normal. This does not mean children fully understand everything they see. Understanding comes later. What matters is familiarity. Familiarity reduces fear and curiosity simultaneously. Nothing feels forbidden. Nothing feels shocking. Adults sometimes comment on children's reactions, laughing when they laugh, correcting gently when they cross invisible lines. These corrections are subtle and situational. Formal discipline is rarely applied to play unless someone is hurt. Shared games also reinforce hierarchy in quiet ways. Children learn who leads, who follows, and who mediates disputes. Adults observe these dynamics without intervening unless necessary. This observation informs future expectations. At the same time, play allows brief suspension of hierarchy. A child who performs well in a game earns attention regardless of age. An adult who fails becomes momentarily equal. These moments of equality are temporary but meaningful. They remind everyone that ability can appear anywhere. You might expect adults to lose interest in games designed for children, but many do not. Simplicity does not equal boredom in a world where stimulation is limited. Repetition is comforting. Adults participate because participation itself fills time and provides connection. There is also pride involved. Adults take satisfaction in enduring longer, reacting faster, or performing better, but this pride is not emphasized openly. It remains understated. Children sense this pride and aim for it. Games that involve physical endurance, discomfort, or bodily humor are especially inclusive because they do not require tools or knowledge. Anyone with a body can join. This accessibility reinforces shared participation. You might notice that children often imitate adults imperfectly, exaggerating movements or sounds. The crowd reacts with amusement rather than correction. This reaction encourages experimentation. Experimentation is valued more than precision. Over time, children internalize the rhythms of play. They learn when attention peaks, when it fades, and when to stop. These timing skills transfer to conversation and work later. Play teaches pacing. Adults benefit from this shared environment as well. Playing alongside children reminds them of their own physical limits and capabilities. It provides contrast to labor. This contrast refreshes attention. In medieval communities, where everyone knows everyone else, shared play strengthens bonds across generations. People recognize each other not only as workers or relatives, but as participants in the same moments of amusement. These shared memories last. Later, someone might say, "Do you remember when?" And the memory belongs to everyone who watched, regardless of age. This collective memory reinforces belonging. Importantly, shared games do not replace responsibility. Children are still expected to work, adults are still expected to lead. Play exists between obligations, not instead of them. This balance prevents resentment. Because play is not isolated, it does not threaten order. It supports it by relieving tension and reinforcing norms. As you move through medieval life, you would rarely hear someone say that a game is only for children or only for adults. That distinction simply does not matter. What matters is whether people have time, attention, and willingness. Understanding that children and adults share the same games helps explain why medieval entertainment feels unified rather than segmented. It is not designed for a demographic. It emerges organically. This unity sets the stage for games with very few rules, where structure is minimal and participation is open, because once age boundaries dissolve, formality often dissolves with them. And in that looseness, amusement takes on a shape that is slow, repetitive, and surprisingly enduring, even when nothing much seems to be happening at all. Once children and adults are playing side by side without clear boundaries, it becomes obvious why so many medieval games operate with very few rules, because strict structure is not only unnecessary, but often counterproductive in environments where attention shifts easily and participation remains fluid. Games are not designed to exclude or rank people permanently. They are designed to exist comfortably within everyday life, slipping in and out of focus without demanding preparation or explanation. In medieval communities, rules are learned through observation rather than instruction, which means that games need to be simple enough to understand immediately, even if you arrive late or have never seen them before. A game with complex rules would require stopping, explaining, correcting, and restarting, and that kind of interruption breaks the natural rhythm people rely on to pass time together. Instead, most games rely on one or two basic ideas that everyone recognizes almost instinctively, such as who can last the longest, who can reach something first, or who can endure something slightly uncomfortable without giving up. These ideas do not need clarification because they mirror daily experience, where effort, patience, and persistence already determine outcomes. You might find yourself watching a game begin without realizing it has begun, because there is no formal start. Someone does something slightly unusual, someone else responds, and suddenly a small group is paying attention. The lack of a clear beginning makes the game feel informal, but that informality is exactly what allows it to grow. Rules remain flexible because flexibility keeps participation open. If someone joins late, the game adjusts. If someone leaves, it continues. There is no obligation to see it through to a defined ending. The game exists as long as interest exists. This openness is important in a world where interruptions are constant. Work, weather, authority, and necessity can pull people away at any moment. A game that demands commitment would collapse too easily. Minimal rules also reduce conflict. When expectations are loose, disputes are rare. If someone disagrees about what counts as winning, the disagreement itself often becomes part of the amusement rather than a problem to solve. The crowd mediates outcomes informally. Laughter, silence, encouragement, and teasing all signal approval or disapproval. These signals matter more than written rules ever could. You might notice that people rarely argue seriously about fairness. Absolute fairness is not the goal. Enjoyment is. As long as most people are entertained, the game succeeds. This attitude reflects a broader medieval approach to structure. Precision is reserved for areas where it truly matters, such as law, religion, and labor. Play does not need the same rigidity. Because of this, games evolve constantly. What begins as one activity slowly shifts into another, as participants change or as the mood shifts. No one announces the change. It simply happens. This fluidity allows games to absorb elements from daily life. Tools, objects, sounds, and movements all become part of play when circumstances allow. Nothing is off limits if it fits the moment. Children adapt to this quickly because they are already accustomed to learning by watching rather than being told. Adults adapt because they prefer not to explain. This shared preference reinforces minimalism. Games with very few rules also encourage creativity without demanding originality. People do not invent new games constantly. They adjust existing ones slightly, responding to immediate conditions. If the ground is uneven, the game adapts. If the crowd is large, it adapts. If attention fades, it ends without ceremony. Ending without ceremony is just as important as beginning without it. There is no disappointment when a game dissolves. Dissolution is expected. This expectation prevents attachment. Games are temporary, like conversations or pauses. They are not meant to last. Because games are not preserved or recorded, repetition is not a problem. The same activity can appear again and again without becoming stale, because the context always differs slightly. You might see the same simple challenge repeated across days or seasons, and people respond as if it is new, not because they forget, but because repetition itself is comforting. Comfort matters in a world filled with uncertainty. Minimal rules also make it easier for games to accommodate physical differences. Age, strength, and ability vary widely in shared spaces. Flexible games allow everyone to find a role. Someone might participate briefly, then step back. Someone else might watch and comment. Both forms of participation are accepted. Watching counts. This acceptance broadens the audience and keeps attention distributed. No one feels excluded for lacking skill. In many cases, the most entertaining part of a game is not the activity itself, but the reactions around it. Comments, laughter, and gestures shape the experience. Because rules are minimal, reaction becomes central. This emphasis on reaction reinforces social awareness. People learn to read faces, anticipate responses, and adjust behavior accordingly. These skills extend beyond play. Games become social training without being labeled as such. You might notice that authority figures rarely intervene in these games, unless something threatens order directly. Minimal rules make games less threatening because they do not create factions or hierarchies that persist. Once the game ends, its effects end with it. This impermanence allows authority to tolerate play without fear. Another advantage of few rules is adaptability to space. Medieval environments are not designed for play. Streets, fields, and courtyards serve many functions. Games must fit wherever people happen to gather. Rigid games would fail in these spaces. Minimal games succeed because they require nothing specific. This adaptability also explains why games often involve standing, waiting, watching, or repeating simple actions rather than elaborate movement. The environment shapes the game. Weather plays a role as well. Cold, heat, mud, and darkness all influence what is possible. Games respond accordingly. When conditions worsen, games simplify further. Despite this simplicity, people do not describe these games as boring. Boredom is addressed by attention, not complexity. As long as attention is shared, the activity works. This shared attention is fragile, but games with few rules protect it by allowing constant adjustment. You might expect modern observers to see these games as incomplete or unfinished, but completeness is not the goal. Presence is. Being there matters more than achieving something. Understanding games with very few rules helps explain why medieval entertainment often appears repetitive or unstructured in historical descriptions. What is missing is not imagination, but the need for definition. Definition belongs elsewhere. Play belongs in the margins, filling spaces between obligations without demanding them. And once you accept that play can exist comfortably without clear rules, it becomes easier to understand why repetition itself becomes a central feature of medieval amusement, where doing the same thing again and again is not a failure of creativity, but a source of stability and calm. That calm, repetitive quality leads naturally into the next layer of medieval entertainment, where long, slow pastimes dominate not because people lack alternatives, but because slowness itself becomes part of the pleasure. Once you understand that medieval games rarely rely on strict rules or clear objectives, repetition stops looking like a flaw and starts looking like the entire point, because repetition is not something people are trying to escape from, It is something they already live inside every single day. Life itself is repetitive. Work is repetitive. Seasons are repetitive. And in that context, entertainment that repeats slowly does not feel empty, it feels familiar and manageable. In medieval life, time does not rush forward in short bursts the way it often does now. Instead, it stretches outward, marked by routine rather than novelty. And because of that, long and slow pastimes fit naturally into the rhythm of existence. When people repeat the same action again and again, they are not waiting for something better to happen. They are letting time pass in a way that feels controlled. You might find yourself watching the same simple action performed over and over. Someone tossing something lightly, someone pacing, someone repeating a sound or motion without clear progress. And yet attention does not fade as quickly as you might expect, because the repetition itself becomes soothing. There is no pressure for resolution, no expectation that something dramatic must occur. Repetition creates predictability, and predictability creates comfort, especially in a world where many aspects of life are uncertain or outside individual control. When you know exactly what will happen next, even if it is nothing remarkable, your mind relaxes. Long, slow pastimes often require very little energy, which matters greatly in a society where physical labor dominates most days. Entertainment that demands intense effort would be unsustainable, but repetition allows participation without exhaustion. You can watch without moving, participate without strain, or drift between the two states without anyone noticing or caring. This flexibility keeps people engaged for longer periods. These pastimes often blur into the background of daily life, rather than standing apart from it. A repetitive game might continue while people talk, eat, or rest. Attention shifts in and out naturally. This loose attention is not seen as disrespectful, it is expected. Because of this, long pastimes do not demand silence or focus. They coexist with noise and distraction. The activity remains present, even when it is not actively watched. This presence matters more than intensity. Repetition also reduces the need for explanation. Once something has been seen once, it never needs to be explained again. Anyone who joins later understands immediately what is happening, even if they do not fully engage. This makes repetition inclusive. You might notice that people rarely ask when a repetitive pastime will end. Ending is not important. The activity continues until something else interrupts it. Interruptions are not failures, they are transitions. Weather changes, work calls, or attention simply fades, and the pastime dissolves without disappointment. In this way, repetition mirrors the structure of medieval days, where activities begin and end based on necessity rather than planning. Long, slow pastimes also allow the mind to wander. People think while watching. They reflect, daydream, or observe others quietly. Entertainment does not demand full mental presence. This partial engagement is restful. In modern terms, you might call this passive entertainment, but in its own context, it is active in a different way, because it holds space rather than attention. Holding space together is socially valuable. People are physically present with one another even if they are not interacting constantly. This presence reinforces community. Repetition supports this by removing pressure to respond or perform. You might see the same motion repeated hundreds of times with no variation, and no one complains, because the value lies not in change but in continuity. Continuity feels safe. Children adapt easily to this because repetition mirrors learning. Adults appreciate it because it mirrors routine. This shared appreciation bridges generations. Long pastimes also make boredom less threatening. Instead of boredom being something to escape urgently, it becomes something to sit with, softened by gentle activity. Sitting with boredom becomes a skill. These pastimes teach patience without naming it. Waiting becomes normal. Slowness becomes acceptable. In a world where travel is slow and communication is delayed, patience is already necessary. Entertainment that reinforces patience aligns with reality. You might expect repetition to dull emotion, but often it does the opposite. Small changes become noticeable. A slight variation draws attention precisely because it breaks the pattern. When something unexpected happens within repetition, it feels significant. This sensitivity to small change sharpens observation. Long, slow pastimes also create shared rhythms. People fall into the same pace, breathing, moving, and reacting in similar ways. This synchronization strengthens group cohesion. Even silence becomes shared. Repetition can also carry humor. Doing the same thing again and again without result becomes absurd. People recognize this and smile. The humor is gentle, not explosive. It does not demand reaction, it invites it. These pastimes rarely produce winners or outcomes. Success is not defined. Participation itself is enough. This absence of outcome removes competition and comparison. People are not measured against one another. This lack of measurement makes long pastimes inclusive across ability and status. No one fails at repetition. Authority figures tolerate these activities easily because they do not disrupt order. They fill time without challenging structure. In some cases, authority figures participate quietly, blending into the group. This blending reduces distance. As hours pass, repetition becomes part of the landscape. It is not remembered as a specific event, but as a feeling associated with a place or day. Memory records mood rather than action. Later, people remember that a day felt calm or slow, even if they cannot recall exactly what they watched. This emotional memory matters. Understanding repetition and long, slow pastimes helps explain why medieval entertainment often feels understated in historical accounts. The value is not in spectacle, but in duration. Duration allows time to soften. Once you accept that slowness itself can be enjoyable, it becomes easier to understand why some of the most common medieval amusements involve doing almost nothing at all, simply sitting, drinking, talking, and letting time pass together without urgency. That quiet, nearly motionless form of entertainment forms another essential layer of medieval fun, where the absence of activity becomes its own kind of comfort. Once repetition and long, slow pastimes become normal, it stops feeling strange that some of the most common forms of medieval entertainment involve very little visible activity at all, because drinking, talking, and doing almost nothing fit perfectly into a world where time is not something to be filled aggressively, but something to be shared gently. In medieval life, being together without a clear purpose is not considered wasteful. It is considered natural, especially after work has ended and the body no longer demands movement. Drinking is rarely the sole focus of these moments, even though it is often present. Ale, beer, or wine acts more as a companion to time than as an event in itself. People drink slowly, not because they are moderating intentionally, but because there is no reason to rush. The drink is there to occupy the hands, to mark the passage of time, and to soften conversation rather than dominate it. Talking follows a similar rhythm. Conversations are rarely intense or goal-oriented. People speak about familiar topics, repeat stories they have already heard, comment on things that everyone can see, and allow silence to appear without discomfort. Silence is not treated as failure. It is simply another state. You might sit among a group where no one speaks for several minutes, and no one feels the need to fill the gap. Someone takes a sip, someone shifts position, someone looks around. The moment remains intact. Doing almost nothing becomes a shared activity rather than an absence of activity. The group is united by presence rather than action. This presence carries weight. In a society where most interactions are tied to necessity, moments without necessity feel valuable. They provide relief from constant purpose. You might expect boredom to take over, but boredom operates differently here. Without constant stimulation as a baseline, low activity does not feel empty, it feels calm. Drinking and talking require minimal effort, which matters after long days of physical labor. The body rests while the mind drifts lightly. This drifting is not aimless, it is restorative. People listen without urgency. Responses come slowly. There is no expectation of wit or performance. Saying nothing impressive is acceptable. Because of this, these moments are inclusive. No one needs skill to participate. Being present is enough. Children are often nearby, listening quietly, absorbing rhythm and tone. They learn how conversation flows without structure. Adults model patience and restraint simply by existing. You might notice that conversations often circle back to the same topics repeatedly. Weather, work, local events, familiar people. Repetition does not frustrate anyone. It reinforces shared understanding. Shared understanding builds trust. Drinking lowers barriers slightly, but not dramatically. Intoxication is not the goal. Relaxation is. Excess is noticed quickly and usually discouraged gently by the group rather than punished formally. This gentle regulation keeps gatherings stable. Doing almost nothing also allows observation. People watch others quietly, noticing small details. Who is tired? Who is distracted? Who is unusually quiet? These observations inform future interactions. Because these moments are unstructured, they allow emotion to surface naturally. Someone sighs, someone laughs softly, someone grows thoughtful. There is room for mood. You might expect entertainment to distract from worries, but often it simply gives them space to exist without pressure. Talking does not solve problems, it acknowledges them. Acknowledgement matters. Drinking and talking also create a sense of continuity across days. These moments feel similar night after night, and that similarity anchors people emotionally. Anchors are important in uncertain times. You might think that nothing memorable happens during these gatherings, but memory works differently here. People remember feelings rather than events. Later, someone recalls that evenings felt warm, slow, or peaceful, even if they cannot recall specific conversations. This emotional memory shapes how people feel about their community. Authority figures sometimes appear in these spaces as well, but they blend in quietly. Without formal structure, hierarchy softens temporarily. This softening allows people to speak more freely, though still carefully. Care remains. Drinking, talking, and doing almost nothing also create opportunities for subtle humor. A delayed response, a repeated phrase, or an awkward pause can provoke gentle laughter. This humor is understated and fleeting. No one performs, no one competes. The absence of competition reduces tension. There is nothing to win or lose. Time itself becomes the only thing passing. You might notice that these gatherings often end without announcement. People drift away gradually. Someone stands, stretches, and leaves. Others follow. The ending feels natural. This gradual dispersal mirrors the beginning, which was likely just as unplanned. These moments do not require preparation or cleanup beyond what is already present. Their simplicity ensures they can happen often. In medieval life, frequency matters more than intensity. Small comforts repeated regularly matter more than rare spectacles. Drinking and talking offer that repetition. They also provide a foundation for other forms of entertainment. Stories told casually might later become performances. Jokes might evolve into games. Nothing is wasted. Doing almost nothing gives space for imagination without demanding it. Understanding this kind of entertainment helps explain why medieval fun often appears passive or uneventful to modern observers. What looks like inactivity is actually shared rest. Shared rest strengthens bonds. Once you accept that doing almost nothing together can be deeply satisfying, it becomes easier to understand why medieval people looked forward to predictable events that returned year after year, where familiar activities repeated on a larger scale, not to surprise, but to reassure. That need for reassurance and rhythm leads naturally into seasonal festivals and celebrations, where fun becomes structured not by novelty, but by expectation. and where predictability itself becomes part of the pleasure. Once drinking, talking, and doing almost nothing become comfortable parts of everyday life, seasonal festivals feel less like interruptions and more like gentle expansions of that same rhythm, because medieval people do not approach celebration as something meant to surprise them, but as something meant to arrive exactly when expected. Predictability is not boring in this context, it is reassuring, and festivals matter precisely because everyone already knows they are coming. In medieval life, the year is shaped by cycles rather than dates on a calendar, and these cycles are deeply felt through work, weather, and daylight. When a festival arrives, it does not feel artificial or imposed. It feels earned because it follows labor, endurance, and waiting. People do not ask what will happen at the festival because they already know, and that knowledge is part of the pleasure. Seasonal festivals rarely introduce entirely new forms of entertainment. Instead, they gather familiar amusements into one place and one time, stretching them slightly, but not transforming them completely. The same games, the same jokes, the same food, and the same conversations appear again, just louder, longer, and with more people watching. This repetition creates comfort rather than disappointment. You might expect people to crave novelty after long periods of routine, but in medieval communities, novelty carries risk. Familiar activities are safe. They do not require explanation. They do not invite conflict. They allow everyone to participate without uncertainty. Festivals succeed because they reduce uncertainty to almost nothing. From the moment people wake up on a festival day, they know roughly how it will unfold. There will be gathering, noise, food, drink, and familiar forms of play. This knowledge allows anticipation without anxiety. Anticipation itself becomes entertainment. People prepare slowly. There is no rush. The day stretches ahead, marked not by strict schedules, but by gradual changes in crowd size and mood. Children sense the difference immediately. They move more freely. Adults speak more openly. Work pauses without guilt. The pause matters. Seasonal festivals also mark time in a way that feels human rather than abstract. People remember events by festivals rather than dates. Something happened after the harvest festival, before the winter feast, or during the spring celebration. Fun becomes a measuring tool. Predictable entertainment plays an important role here. When the same games appear each year, people compare experiences quietly. Someone lasted longer this time. Someone laughed more easily. Someone is no longer there. These comparisons deepen memory. You might notice that festivals rarely aim to impress outsiders. They are for the community itself. Even when strangers are present, the activities remain unchanged. There is no performance for an external audience. This inward focus keeps festivals grounded. They reinforce identity rather than display it. Food and drink are more abundant during festivals, but they are not extravagant in modern terms. Abundance is relative. Having slightly more than usual feels generous. Sharing is emphasized over indulgence. Games during festivals often involve larger crowds, but they remain simple. Rules are still minimal. Participation remains fluid. The scale changes, not the structure. Watching becomes just as important as participating. People stand for long periods, observing familiar activities unfold. Attention drifts, returns, and drifts again. This relaxed attention allows conversation to continue alongside entertainment. Music may appear, but it follows similar principles. Familiar tunes, repeated rhythms, predictable patterns. People know when to join in and when to listen. Predictability allows comfort. You might expect festivals to encourage excess, but excess is usually self-limiting. Physical fatigue, limited resources, and social norms prevent extremes from dominating. Moderation emerges naturally. Authority figures are present, but often less visible. Their role shifts from enforcement to observation. As long as order holds, they intervene little. This restraint allows fun to feel genuine rather than supervised. Seasonal festivals also provide permission for behaviors that might feel inappropriate on ordinary days. Louder laughter, longer conversations, playful teasing, and mild rule-bending become acceptable. This permission is temporary and understood by everyone. Because it is temporary, it does not threaten structure. Predictable fun helps regulate emotion across the year. People endure difficult periods knowing that a festival will arrive eventually. The promise of familiar enjoyment softens hardship. Hope becomes practical. Even when times are hard, festivals rarely disappear entirely. They may shrink, but they remain. Their persistence matters more than their scale. Persistence signals continuity. Children grow up associating certain feelings with certain times of year, warmth with summer gatherings, quiet with winter feasts. These associations shape emotional memory. Adults feel these associations too, though they may not articulate them. Festivals also create opportunities for reunion. People who live slightly apart return. Familiar faces reappear. Recognition brings comfort. Entertainment during these gatherings often unfolds slowly. There is no rush to experience everything. People trust that the day will provide enough. This trust reduces urgency. You might notice that people rarely complain that festivals are the same every year. Sameness is expected. Change would feel unsettling. Sameness confirms stability. Seasonal festivals do not aim to distract from life. They reflect it. They condense its rhythms into visible form. Fun here is not escape, it is affirmation. Understanding seasonal festivals as predictable rather than spectacular helps explain why medieval entertainment feels restrained. The goal is not to overwhelm senses, but to align them. Alignment brings peace. Once you accept that predictability itself can be enjoyable, it becomes easier to understand why medieval people often laugh at things that seem painful, embarrassing, or uncomfortable. Because humor in this world is not about avoiding hardship, but about acknowledging it openly. That acknowledgement leads directly into forms of entertainment, where pain, embarrassment, and laughter exist together, not as contradictions, but as companions, shaping how people endure daily life with a lighter touch. Once you understand how predictable festivals, slow pastimes, and shared routines shape medieval fun, it becomes easier to accept something that might otherwise feel strange, which is how naturally pain, embarrassment, and laughter exist together as a single experience rather than three separate ideas. In a world where physical discomfort is already part of daily life, pain does not automatically signal danger or tragedy, and embarrassment does not carry the same lasting emotional weight it does today, so both can become materials for humor without crossing an invisible line. Medieval people are not seeking pain for its own sake, but they are also not actively avoiding it when it appears in playful contexts. Discomfort is familiar. Bruises, sore muscles, cold mornings, and minor injuries are normal, so when pain appears during games or public amusements, it feels like an extension of everyday experience rather than an intrusion. This familiarity lowers the emotional intensity of pain. Embarrassment works the same way. Privacy is limited in medieval life. People dress, wash, work, and rest in close proximity to others. Mistakes happen in public. Bodies make sounds. Clothes fail. Words come out wrong. None of this is shocking. Because embarrassment is common, it loses its power to isolate. When someone trips, falls, or makes an awkward mistake during a public game, laughter follows quickly, not because cruelty dominates the crowd, but because recognition does. Everyone knows how easily it could have been them. Laughter becomes communal reassurance rather than judgment. You can imagine standing in a medieval square watching someone attempt a simple challenge, slipping in the mud and landing awkwardly. The crowd laughs, but not sharply. The sound is rounded, rolling, almost warm. The person gets up, brushes themselves off, and might even bow or exaggerate the mistake for effect. Participation continues. Pain in these moments is real, but it is temporary, and its visibility makes it manageable. When pain is shared, it loses some of its fear. This is why so many games and entertainments involve physical strain, awkward movement, or mild humiliation. They allow people to face discomfort in a controlled, socially supported environment. Control matters. The difference between punishment and play is consent and context. In games, people choose to participate. Even when social pressure exists, the choice feels internal. This choice transforms experience. Embarrassment during play also serves a social function. It levels status differences. A respected craftsman slipping during a game looks no different from a laborer doing the same. For a moment, hierarchy softens. That softening feels refreshing. Laughter becomes a tool for releasing tension built up through rigid social roles. For a short time, everyone is equally clumsy, equally human. This equality does not threaten the social order because it is temporary and understood. Pain also marks effort. When someone endures discomfort publicly, they demonstrate resilience. This earns respect rather than ridicule. Endurance is admired. Games that involve mild pain allow people to show toughness without real danger. Scrapes and soreness become proof of participation. These proofs matter more than victory. Embarrassment also tests emotional resilience. Being laughed at without withdrawing demonstrates strength. People who handle embarrassment well gain social approval. Grace under laughter is a skill. This skill develops early. Children grow up learning that being laughed at is not the end of belonging. Adults reinforce this lesson through example. Belonging is resilient. Public humor often targets universal vulnerabilities. Bodies are unreliable. Balance fails. Voices crack. These truths are shared. Shared truths create shared laughter. Painful humor rarely focuses on lasting injury. Serious harm breaks the spell. The crowd reacts differently. Silence replaces laughter. This boundary is instinctive. People know when fun has turned into danger, and they respond accordingly. Because of this awareness, playful pain remains within limits. It is calibrated through experience rather than written rules. Calibration is collective. Embarrassment also provides narrative. Stories about past mishaps circulate long after the event. They are retold gently, often with exaggeration that softens their edge. Memory becomes entertainment. People remember how someone fell, laughed, and continued. The continuation matters more than the fall. This emphasis on recovery reinforces resilience. Pain, embarrassment, and laughter also function as emotional release. Life is physically demanding and socially constrained. Opportunities to express vulnerability are rare. Public mishaps allow vulnerability without confession. Laughter carries the emotion away. You might notice that cruelty exists, but it does not define the system. Mockery that isolates is discouraged informally through social cues. The crowd's response shifts when laughter turns sharp. Social regulation is subtle. The goal of humor is not domination, but connection. This connection strengthens group bonds. Shared laughter after shared discomfort creates trust. Trust builds community. Even outsiders can be drawn in through these experiences. Watching, then participating, then being laughed at gently becomes a form of integration. Initiation through embarrassment. Pain and laughter also help people process fear. By turning discomfort into play, they reduce its power. Fear becomes familiar. This familiarity carries into other parts of life. Enduring discomfort in games prepares people for hardship elsewhere. Play trains endurance. When medieval people laugh at pain, they are not denying suffering. They are acknowledging it openly and refusing to let it dominate their emotional world. This refusal is quiet, but powerful. Understanding this helps explain why medieval entertainment often looks harsh or crude to modern eyes. It operates under different emotional assumptions shaped by necessity. As we move forward, it becomes clear that these attitudes toward pain, embarrassment, and laughter deeply influence how medieval people understand humor itself, especially when it becomes exaggerated again, and finally ritualized into something that feels absurd but strangely accepted, where bodily functions, noise, and public reaction merge into entertainment without apology. And once you accept that, the step toward humor built entirely around the body and its sounds feels less shocking and more inevitable. Medieval entertainment relies far more on watching than doing, and this is not because people lack imagination or desire, but because observation fits naturally into a life where energy, safety, and social position must always be managed carefully. For most ordinary people, especially those who work with their bodies every day, the idea of entertainment that requires additional effort feels unnecessary. While standing nearby, leaning against a wall, or sitting on a low bench and watching others struggle, argue, compete, or embarrass themselves already provides enough stimulation to make time pass more gently. Watching does not ask anything from the body, it does not demand confidence or skill, and it does not risk failure, which makes it the most accessible and widely shared form of amusement across all ages and social levels. Public spaces naturally support this kind of entertainment because medieval towns and villages are built for visibility rather than privacy, meaning that almost anything done outside quickly becomes something watched by others. A simple disagreement, a minor competition, or even someone attempting a task slightly beyond their ability can draw a crowd without effort, not because the act itself is impressive, but because human activity breaks the visual sameness of daily life. People gather out of curiosity rather than excitement, and they stay because watching allows them to feel present without committing themselves to the outcome, which creates a relaxed form of involvement where attention can drift, return, and drift again without consequence. In this environment, watching becomes a shared habit rather than a passive choice, and the crowd itself becomes part of the entertainment, reacting together through laughter, quiet commentary, or collective anticipation as something unfolds slowly in front of them. Observation also provides a layer of safety that participation does not, especially in a society where public failure can carry social consequences, even if those consequences are temporary. By watching, people avoid the risk of embarrassment while still enjoying its presence in others, and this distance softens the emotional impact of mistakes, turning them into shared moments rather than personal wounds. Watching someone fail at a simple task, repeat the same mistake, or struggle against something stubborn creates a familiar rhythm of expectation and release, where the pleasure comes not from surprise, but from recognizing patterns and waiting for the inevitable outcome. This predictability makes watching soothing rather than stimulating, which aligns perfectly with a culture that values endurance and patience over excitement. The act of watching also encourages conversation, which often becomes more important than the activity itself, because observers fill the quiet moments with comments, jokes, memories of similar past events, and comparisons that stretch the entertainment beyond what is physically happening. People talk about who did better last time, who always fails at the same point, or how long something usually takes, turning observation into a communal storytelling process that continues even after the event ends. These shared observations create a collective memory that strengthens social bonds, because remembering together is often more meaningful than acting alone, and watching provides endless material for these memories without requiring individual risk. Social roles strongly influence who participates and who watches, but watching is never considered inferior, because it allows inclusion without exposure, which is especially important for children, elders, women, and outsiders who may not feel comfortable stepping into public performance. Watching offers a way to belong without standing out, and in medieval communities, blending in is often safer than distinguishing oneself. This makes observation a form of quiet participation that respects personal limits while still maintaining connection to the group, and because everyone watches at some point, the role carries no stigma or judgment. There is also an educational aspect to watching that should not be overlooked, because people learn rules, boundaries, and acceptable behavior by observing others make mistakes and correct them publicly. Watching teaches patience, timing, and emotional control, as observers learn when laughter is acceptable, when silence falls, and when concern replaces amusement. These subtle lessons shape social awareness and help maintain communal balance without formal instruction. And because watching is constant, learning happens naturally and repeatedly across a lifetime. Time behaves differently when watching, stretching in a way that makes slow activities feel satisfying rather than dull, especially in a world without constant distraction. A game that lasts an hour feels longer when observed, but that length is not uncomfortable, because attention does not need to remain fixed. People watch, look away, talk, return their focus, and continue this cycle without pressure, allowing entertainment to coexist with rest. This fluid attention makes watching ideal for filling long afternoons or evenings, where the goal is not to be amazed, but simply to avoid the weight of stillness. Crowds themselves become part of what is being watched, as people observe reactions as much as actions, noticing who laughs first, who looks uncomfortable, who leans in, and who drifts away. This meta-observation adds depth to simple activities, because the audience mirrors the performer, creating layers of engagement that do not require complexity. The shared awareness of being watched also influences behavior, as participants exaggerate movements, repeat actions, or delay outcomes slightly to hold attention, even if they are not consciously performing, which blurs the line between actor and observer in subtle ways. Watching also allows people to disengage easily, which is important in a culture where obligations are constant and freedom is limited. An observer can leave at any moment without explanation, guilt, or consequence, making watching a low-risk way to experience pleasure. This flexibility encourages participation in public life, because it does not trap individuals into commitment, and this ease of entry and exit keeps crowds fluid and dynamic, preventing boredom from turning into frustration. The dominance of watching explains why medieval entertainment often appears repetitive and slow to modern eyes, because repetition is not a flaw in this system, but a feature that allows observers to settle into familiarity. Familiar actions invite relaxed attention, while unfamiliar ones demand focus and effort, and medieval people prefer the former, especially after long days of labor. Watching the same types of events year after year builds comfort rather than fatigue, because each repetition reinforces a sense of continuity and shared experience. Understanding how central watching is to medieval fun helps explain why so many forms of entertainment rely on public visibility, simple actions, and exaggerated reactions rather than complex rules or outcomes. And it also prepares us to understand why sound, noise, and bodily expression become increasingly important as entertainment shifts away from physical participation and toward collective response. When watching matters more than doing, what people react to becomes more important than what people achieve. And this shift leads naturally into forms of amusement where laughter is triggered not by skill or victory, but by noise, repetition, and shared recognition of the human body behaving in ways everyone understands. All of these forms of entertainment, from watching others struggle with simple tasks to laughing at embarrassment, pain, noise, and repetition, feel strange only when viewed through modern expectations, because medieval people are not measuring fun against excitement, novelty, or personal fulfillment in the way we tend to today. What feels normal to them is shaped by constant physical labor, limited privacy, shared spaces, and a deep familiarity with discomfort, which means their threshold for what counts as unusual is very different from ours. When daily life already includes exhaustion, cold, hunger, noise, and unpredictability, entertainment does not need to add intensity. It only needs to soften what already exists. Normality in the medieval world is built on exposure. People are exposed to each other constantly, to bodies working, failing, sweating, making sounds, and breaking down, and this exposure removes much of the shock that modern life carefully avoids. When you see the same people every day performing the same tasks under the same conditions, their mistakes, weaknesses, and awkward moments stop feeling personal and start feeling expected. Entertainment grows naturally out of this expectation, because watching these moments unfold publicly confirms that everyone shares the same limits and frustrations, and that confirmation brings comfort rather than discomfort. Pain feels normal because it is constant. Sore muscles, small injuries, and physical strain are not interruptions to life, they are part of its structure, so when pain appears in games or public amusements, it does not signal danger, unless it crosses an obvious boundary. This familiarity allows people to laugh where modern viewers might flinch, because the pain being laughed at is understood as temporary and survivable, not threatening or traumatic. The body is expected to hurt, and because of that expectation, pain loses its emotional sharpness and becomes something that can coexist with humor without feeling cruel. Embarrassment follows the same pattern. In a world with little privacy, mistakes are rarely hidden, and because they are seen so often, they lose their ability to isolate individuals emotionally. Falling, misjudging, or making a fool of oneself happens to everyone, so embarrassment becomes a shared experience rather than a personal failure. Laughing at embarrassment does not push someone out of the group, it pulls them further in by reminding everyone that perfection is neither expected nor valued. Normality is defined by imperfection, and entertainment reflects that definition. Watching rather than participating also feels normal, because energy is a resource that must be conserved, not spent casually. People do not see passivity as laziness, but as balance. After long hours of labor, standing and observing provides stimulation without strain, and this form of engagement aligns perfectly with bodies that are already tired. Entertainment that demands effort feels unnecessary when watching provides enough distraction to make time move gently, and because so many people share this preference, watching becomes socially reinforced rather than questioned. Noise plays a similar role. Medieval environments are rarely quiet by modern standards. Animals, tools, people, and nature itself create a constant background of sound, so silence is not the default state. When entertainment involves shouting, laughter, bodily sounds, or repetitive noise, it blends into the existing soundscape rather than disrupting it. Noise feels natural because quiet feels unfamiliar, and amusement built around sound does not stand out as crude or excessive, but as an extension of everyday life. Repetition also feels normal, because medieval time moves slowly and predictably. Days follow similar patterns, seasons repeat, tasks return again and again. In this context, repetition does not signal stagnation, it signals stability. Entertainment that repeats year after year reassures people that the world is continuing as it should, and that reassurance is more valuable than novelty. Familiar games, jokes, and rituals confirm that life is still recognizable, even when individual circumstances change. Social boundaries reinforce this sense of normality. Everyone understands the limits of play, even when those limits are not written down. There is a shared awareness of when laughter is appropriate and when it should stop, when pain is acceptable and when it becomes serious, and when embarrassment crosses into harm. These boundaries are learned through observation rather than instruction, and because they are widely understood, people trust the system. Trust allows people to relax into entertainment without fear, because they believe the group will correct itself if something goes too far. Authority figures also contribute to this normalization by their relative absence during play. As long as order is maintained, officials often observe rather than intervene, which signals that these activities are accepted parts of social life rather than tolerated exceptions. This quiet approval reinforces the idea that such amusements are not disruptions, but essential pressure valves that help maintain balance within the community. The lack of alternatives further solidifies normality. Without access to constant stimulation, personal entertainment devices, or private leisure spaces, people work with what is available, and what is available is each other. Human behavior becomes the primary source of interest, and when people are the main entertainment, their flaws, sounds, and struggles naturally take center stage. There is no comparison to something better or more refined, so nothing feels lacking. Children grow up immersed in this environment, learning from an early age that laughter, discomfort, and observation are intertwined. Because they never experience a sharp separation between private and public selves, they carry this understanding into adulthood, reinforcing the cycle. What is learned early feels natural later, and because each generation passes down the same expectations, entertainment remains stable over long periods of time. Memory also plays a role. People remember past amusements fondly not because they were exciting, but because they were shared. Shared memory smooths rough edges. Pain is remembered less sharply. Embarrassment becomes humorous in hindsight. Repetition turns into tradition. Over time, these memories reinforce the idea that such experiences are not only normal, but valuable. Even hardship contributes to this perception. When life is difficult, small pleasures stand out more clearly. A simple game, a shared laugh, or an afternoon spent watching others provides relief that feels meaningful precisely because it is modest. Entertainment does not need to transform life, it only needs to interrupt it gently. Modern discomfort with these forms of fun often comes from distance rather than difference. We expect entertainment to stimulate, distract, or impress, while medieval people expect it to connect, reassure, and normalize. Their fun is not designed to elevate the individual, but to steady the group. Once you accept that normality is defined by exposure, repetition, and shared endurance, medieval entertainment stops feeling bizarre and starts feeling practical. It reflects a world where the body is always present, where privacy is rare, and where community matters more than personal preference. Laughter grows out of recognition rather than surprise, and watching others becomes meaningful because it confirms that everyone is navigating the same limits. Understanding why these things felt normal at the time helps explain why medieval people did not question their amusements, defend them, or try to improve them. They worked, they filled time, they strengthened bonds. That was enough. And with that understanding in place, the final step is to look at how all of these habits, preferences, and assumptions come together into a complete picture of medieval fun, where strange does not mean abnormal, and boredom itself becomes something quietly shared rather than feared. Fun in medieval life is easy to misunderstand if it is judged by how exciting, joyful, or memorable it appears from the outside, because its real purpose is not to elevate mood dramatically, but to make endurance possible over long stretches of repetition, hardship, and uncertainty. For most ordinary people, daily life is physically exhausting, socially constrained, and emotionally predictable, and entertainment does not exist to break these conditions apart, but to soften their edges just enough to prevent despair from taking root. Fun is not a reward for success, but a tool for survival. Daily labor consumes most physical and mental energy, leaving little room for activities that demand enthusiasm or preparation, so medieval fun fits into the margins of life rather than interrupting it. It appears between tasks, after work, or during brief communal pauses, and because it requires minimal effort, it does not feel like another obligation. Watching others, listening to noise, repeating familiar games, or laughing at shared embarrassment offers mental relief without demanding additional strength, which allows people to recover emotionally while their bodies rest. Endurance depends heavily on predictability, and fun provides this in subtle ways. Knowing that certain amusements will return at specific times or under familiar conditions gives people something stable to anticipate, even when other aspects of life feel uncertain. This anticipation does not create excitement, but reassurance, because it confirms that life is continuing in its expected pattern. The reassurance matters more than the activity itself, because it anchors people emotionally during periods of hardship. Shared fun also reinforces social bonds that are essential for endurance. When people laugh together, watch together, or remember the same events, they strengthen a sense of belonging that makes individual suffering easier to bear. Hardship feels lighter when it is shared, and entertainment provides a socially acceptable way to acknowledge difficulty without openly discussing it. Laughter becomes a form of collective coping, allowing people to express frustration, fatigue, and vulnerability indirectly. Fun also creates emotional balance by offering moments of release that do not threaten social order. In a world where roles are rigid and expectations are clear, entertainment provides brief spaces where hierarchy softens without collapsing. Laughing at a respected figure's mistake, watching a strong person fail at a simple task, or seeing everyone equally confused by a game reminds people that authority and strength are temporary states, not permanent truths. This reminder does not undermine respect, but prevents resentment from building unchecked. Physical humor plays a particularly important role in endurance because it reframes discomfort as something survivable. When pain appears in playful contexts, it becomes less frightening, and when embarrassment is laughed at rather than punished, it loses its power to isolate. These experiences teach people that suffering does not always lead to loss of status or belonging, which makes everyday discomfort easier to tolerate. Endurance improves when fear decreases. Fun also structures time in a way that makes long days feel manageable. Small amusements break the day into sections, creating informal markers that make time feel less endless. Watching an activity, listening to a story, or waiting for a familiar game to conclude gives people something to orient themselves around, reducing the mental weight of long hours. Time becomes segmented rather than overwhelming. Memory strengthens this effect. People remember moments of fun, not because they were extraordinary, but because they provided contrast within otherwise uniform days. These memories become internal resources that people revisit mentally during difficult moments, reinforcing the idea that life contains not only labor and obligation, but also shared warmth and humor. Remembering together further reinforces these emotional supports. Fun also helps regulate emotion by providing safe outlets for tension. Anger, frustration, and fatigue are natural responses to hard living conditions, but open conflict threatens community stability. Entertainment allows these emotions to surface in softened forms through laughter, teasing, and exaggerated performance, which release pressure without causing lasting harm. This emotional regulation is essential for endurance in close-knit communities. The communal nature of medieval fun also prevents isolation, which is one of the greatest threats to endurance. Even passive participation through watching keeps people connected, ensuring that individuals are rarely left alone with their difficulties. Being seen, even without speaking, reinforces the sense that one exists within a supportive network. This visibility provides quiet reassurance. Children benefit from this system early, learning that endurance is supported by shared amusement rather than private escape. Growing up watching adults laugh at discomfort and accept repetition teaches resilience as a social skill rather than a personal achievement. This early conditioning shapes how adults later respond to hardship, reinforcing the cycle. Fun also maintains mental flexibility by reminding people that not every moment needs to be productive or purposeful. In a life defined by necessity, entertainment offers permission to exist without striving, even briefly. This permission helps prevent burnout long before the concept exists as a word, allowing people to continue functioning under demanding conditions. Even boredom plays a role. Accepting boredom rather than fighting it teaches patience, which strengthens endurance. Fun that coexists with boredom, rather than eliminating it, trains people to remain present without constant stimulation, reducing emotional dependence on excitement. This calm tolerance of monotony supports long-term stability. Religious and cultural frameworks further support this understanding of fun, framing it as part of a balanced life rather than a distraction from duty. Entertainment is not opposed to work, but woven into it, reinforcing the idea that endurance requires both effort and relief. Understanding how fun supports endurance reveals why medieval entertainment appears modest, repetitive, or even crude by modern standards. Its effectiveness lies not in intensity, but in consistency. It does not aim to transform life, but to make it livable. Fun becomes a quiet companion to hardship, walking alongside people rather than lifting them above their circumstances. It reminds them that they are not alone, that others are enduring the same struggles, and that laughter, however simple, still has a place in their days. And with this perspective, it becomes possible to look back at medieval fun not as a collection of strange habits, but as a deeply practical system designed to keep people going day after day, year after year, until endurance itself becomes a shared achievement rather than an individual burden. In the end, medieval entertainment rarely ends with a clear boundary, because it does not explode into life and then disappear, It slowly fades back into work the same way it emerged, without announcement or ceremony. People stop watching, conversations thin out, laughter softens, and bodies naturally return to familiar tasks, not because fun is finished, but because it has done its job, which is to make endurance possible without demanding attention. Work resumes carrying a slightly lighter weight, time feels a little less heavy, and the memory of shared moments lingers quietly rather than demanding reflection. Entertainment does not stand apart from life in this world. It weaves through it, touches it gently, and then lets go, leaving behind a sense of normality restored rather than disrupted. And with that, this is all from me for tonight. I hope this helped you drift a little further away from the noise of the day, and if you are somehow still awake after listening this far, don't be shy about leaving a like and subscribing, and until another night, take good care of yourself.